Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was living in a small, old apartment building on the outskirts of my college town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap and close enough to campus to walk. The building was quiet, usually inhabited by students and older couples. I'd lived there for about 6 months, and nothing had ever seemed out of the ordinary until one night in October. It was a Thursday, and I'd stayed late at the library, cramming for midterms. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. The streetlights cast eerie shadows on the cracked pavement as I walked toward the entrance of my building. I felt a slight chill, but brushed it off as the October air. As I unlocked the front door and stepped into the dimly lit hallway, I noticed something strange. A man was standing at the far end of the corridor, partially hidden in shadow. He wasn't moving, just standing there with his back to me. I froze, my keys still in my hand. The man didn't look familiar, and I knew everyone in the building at least by sight. He was tall and wearing a dark hoodie that obscured most of his features. I hesitated, wondering if I should say something, but the longer I stared, the more uneasy I felt. Trying to act casual, I quickly walked to my apartment, which was thankfully only a few doors down from the entrance. As I unlocked my door, I glanced back. The man hadn't moved. I went inside, locked the deadbolt, and exhaled a shaky breath. Maybe he was just waiting for someone, I thought, trying to calm myself. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I turned off the lights in my living room and peeked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Maybe he'd left. Relieved, I decided to shower and get ready for bed. About 20 minutes later, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from my front door. My heart stopped. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound came again, long, deliberate scratches, as if someone was dragging their nails down the wood. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy lamp, and crept toward the door. The scratching stopped, then came a quiet knock. Who was it? I called, my voice trembling. No answer. I looked through the peephole again, but all I could see was darkness. Whoever it was had covered the peephole. I backed away, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Before I could decide, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking away from my door and down the hallway. I stayed up all night, listening for any sound of him coming back. The next morning, I told my landlord about what happened, and he promised to check the security cameras. Later that day, he called me, his voice unusually tense. I don't know how to tell you this, he said, but the cameras didn't catch anyone entering or leaving the building around the time you got home last night. And there's no footage of anyone standing in the hallway. The story didn't end when I moved out. I'd like to say that leaving that apartment erased the memory of what happened, but it didn't. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in my new place. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every strange noise made me jump. I chalked it up to paranoia until something happened that made me question everything. About a month after I moved, I received a package I hadn't ordered. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. The handwriting on the label was shaky, almost childlike, and spelled my name perfectly. My stomach churned as I stared at it. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a single item, a photograph. It was a picture of the hallway outside my old apartment, taken from the perspective of someone standing at the far end, the same spot where I'd seen the man. There was no one in the photo, just the empty corridor bathed in dim yellow light, but something was written on the back of the picture in the same shaky handwriting. Miss May. I felt sick. How did this person know where I lived now? How did they even know I had moved? I immediately called the police and filed a report. They took the package and photo as evidence, but I could tell by the officer's skeptical expression that they didn't think much would come of it. After that, I became hypervigilant. I changed my routines, never walked anywhere alone, and started locking every door and window even during the day. Weeks passed without any further incidents, and I started to relax, thinking maybe whoever it was had finally lost interest. Then, one night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, the faint glow of my bedside lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. It was quiet, too quiet, when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of scratching, faint but deliberate, coming from my front door. My blood turned to ice. I wanted to get up, but fear held me down, pinning me to the mattress. This time, I didn't call out. I didn't dare move. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, though it was likely only a few minutes. Then came the knock, soft, almost polite. My chest felt like it was going to explode from the pressure of holding my breath. I reached reached for my phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The operator stayed on the line with me as I whispered what was happening. I didn't dare approach the door or look through the peephole. I just stayed frozen in my room until I heard the knock again, this time louder, more insistent. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they got there, the hallway was empty. No sign of forced entry, no marks on the door, nothing to indicate someone had been there. The officers assured me they would patrol the area and advised me to stay somewhere else for the night. I took their advice and crashed on a friend's couch. The next morning, I returned to my apartment to find something waiting for me. Taped to my door was another photograph. This one was of me asleep in my bed. The police took the new evidence seriously this time. They told me to pack a bag and stay somewhere safe while they investigated. I stayed with friends for weeks, too terrified to return. Eventually, I decided it wasn't worth the anxiety and broke my lease. I moved to a new city, far away from anyone who knew my old address. To this day, I don't know who it was, how they found me, or what they wanted, but every so often, I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I heard a knock. Even after moving to a new city, I couldn't shake the fear. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it felt deeper, more ingrained, like a permanent scar. For months, I avoided making friends or sharing too much about myself with anyone. I'd even kept my workplace vague when talking to neighbors. My therapist said it was PTSD, which made sense, but knowing that didn't make it any easier to sleep at night. The first 6 months in my new place were uneventful. Slowly, I started to relax. I didn't hear any strange noises, no mysterious packages arrived, and I began to believe that maybe I left it all behind. Maybe whoever or whatever had been stalking me finally gave up. I started feeling like a normal person again. Then it happened. It was a Saturday night, and I'd gone out with coworkers for drinks. It was the first time I'd really let loose since everything happened. I came home late, a little tipsy but happy. As I walked into my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, locked the door, and headed to the kitchen for some water. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a single, muddy footprint in the middle of my living room. It wasn't mine. The footprint was too big to belong to me, and the tread pattern didn't match any of my shoes. It looked fresh, as if someone had just stepped there moments before. My heart began to race as I scanned the room. Everything looked normal, nothing was out of place, but that didn't comfort me. I backed out of the living room and grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone had been in my apartment. They told me to stay on the line and hide until the police arrived. I locked myself in the bathroom, clutching the knife and holding my breath. Every creak and groan of the old building made my heart pound. I was convinced whoever left that footprint was still in the apartment, hiding, waiting. The police arrived quickly, but their search turned up nothing. No sign of forced entry, no one hiding in closets or under the bed. They looked at the footprint and suggested it could have been an old mark I hadn't noticed before, maybe tracked in by a maintenance worker. But I knew better. The footprint wasn't there when I left that evening. Someone had been inside while I was out. The police installed extra locks on my doors and advised me to get a security system. I followed their advice, even adding cameras inside and outside my apartment. For weeks, I felt like I was under siege in my own home, constantly checking the footage for any sign of someone lurking nearby. One night, as I was reviewing the day's recordings, I saw something that made my stomach drop. At 2:37 a.m., while I was sound asleep, the hallway camera outside my apartment captured a figure standing outside my door. It was blurry, but the person was tall, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over their face. They stood there for several minutes, motionless, before leaning down as if to listen at the door. Then they turned and walked away. The footage sent me spiraling into a panic. I sent it to the police, but by the time they arrived, the person was long gone. They promised to increase patrols in the area, but it didn't feel like enough. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a bag and stayed in a hotel, then made plans to move again, this time without telling anyone where I was going. I'm writing this now from another new apartment in another new city. It's been a year since I last saw the footage of the man outside my door. Maybe it's over, maybe they finally stopped, but I still can't shake the feeling that it's not over. I double check my locks every night, and I never leave home without looking over my shoulder, and sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I hear a faint knock at the door. I was home for summer break, staying with my parents in the small, rural town where I grew up. Our house was on the edge of a dense forest, and I always loved exploring the trails there. It was peaceful, quiet, and a great way to clear my mind. That summer, though, I had an experience that made me never want to go back. One afternoon, I decided to take a long hike. I packed a small bag with water, snacks, and a flashlight, just in case. I let my mom know where I was going and headed out. The weather was perfect, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. I felt a at ease as I wandered deeper into the woods, following a trail I'd been on dozens of times before. After about an hour, I came to a fork in the path. Normally, I'd go right toward a small lake, but for some reason, I felt like going left. I hadn't been down that trail in years, and curiosity got the better of me. The path was overgrown, but I pushed through the bushes and kept walking. It felt exciting to be somewhere I hadn't been in so long, almost like an adventure. About 20 minutes in, I started to notice something odd. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, insects, the wind, had quieted. It wasn't completely silent, but it was noticeably different. I told myself I was imagining things and kept going. That's when I saw it. Ahead of me, just off the trail, was a small clearing. In the center was a wooden structure, almost like a shack or a hunting blind. It was old and looked like it had been there for years. I'd never seen it before, and I was certain it hadn't been there the last time I'd hiked this trail. Curiosity got the better of me again, and I stepped off the path to get a closer look. The shack was crude, made of weathered wood and rusted nails. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't explain why. Still, I leaned closer to peek inside. The interior was dark, but I could make out a few objects: an old chair, a filthy blanket on the floor, and what looked like empty food wrappers scattered around. It reeked of rot and mildew. I decided I'd seen enough and turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. They were faint but deliberate, coming from deeper in the woods. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I scanned the trees, but I couldn't see anyone. The footsteps got louder, closer. Then I heard a voice, low and gruff. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I spun around and saw a man emerging from the trees. He was tall, unkempt, and had a wild look in his eyes. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he was carrying something in his hand, a hatchet. I stammered something about being lost, my mind racing. The man just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I turned and bolted back toward the trail, not daring to look back. I could hear him yelling after me, but I couldn't make out the words. My only focus was on getting away. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I made it back to the main trail and then to the edge of the woods. I didn't stop until I was inside my house, slamming the door behind me. My mom was startled and asked what was wrong, but I couldn't even explain. I just said I'd seen something in the woods and didn't want to go back. I later told a friend about the shack, and he said he'd heard rumors about someone living in the woods, an old hermit or drifter who didn't like people trespassing on his land. I don't know if that's who I encountered, and frankly, I don't care. All I know is that I never went back to that part of the forest. The days following the encounter were rough. I couldn't shake the image of the man from my mind. His dirty clothes, the way he smiled like he knew something I didn't. I kept telling myself I was safe, that I'd gotten away, but a part of me felt like I'd left something unfinished. Who was he? Why was he out there? And most importantly, what would have happened if I hadn't run? A week passed, and I started to feel a little more normal. I avoided the woods entirely, even though they were a huge part of my life growing up. I stayed close to home and made excuses when my friends asked me to go hiking or camping. I didn't want to tell anyone what happened. It sounded crazy, like something out of a bad horror movie. One night, though, something happened that pulled me right back into the fear. It was late, maybe around midnight. My parents had already gone to bed, and I was in my room scrolling on my phone. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wood floors. I just started to doze off when I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the window. At first, I thought it was just tree branches swaying in the wind, but then it happened again and again. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic to be the wind. My heart started pounding as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The tapping stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard something else, footsteps, this time outside, moving along the side of the house. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone and crept to the window, staying low so I wouldn't be seen. Slowly, I peeked out, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. Still, I knew someone was out there. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel eyes on me. It was the same feeling I'd had in the woods, that sense of being watched. Trying to keep calm, I texted my dad, who was just down the hall. "Someone's outside. I think they're at my window." Seconds later, I heard his door open, followed by the unmistakable sound of him cocking his old shotgun. He flicked on the floodlights outside, and I heard him shout, "Who's out there? Show yourself." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from the woods at the edge of our property, I heard movement, branches snapping and leaves rustling, like someone running away. My dad stood on the porch for a while, scanning the tree line, but whoever it was had disappeared into the night. The next morning, we found footprints in the dirt outside my window. They were large, clearly made by a man, and they led straight to the woods. My dad called the local sheriff, who came out to take a look. The officer was nice enough, but didn't seem overly concerned. "Probably just a drifter," he said. "We get them around here here sometimes. Nothing to worry about. But I was worried. The prints were fresh, and they were too close to my window for comfort. I couldn't prove it, but I knew it was the man from the shack. Somehow, he'd found out where I lived. After that night, my dad installed extra locks on all the doors and windows, and we made a habit of keeping the floodlights on at night. I didn't see or hear anything unusual for the rest of the summer, but I never truly felt safe again. When it was time to go back to college, I left with a sense of relief. I still come home to visit my parents, but I avoid the woods entirely. Even now, years later, I get chills thinking about that summer. Who was that man? What did he want? I'll probably never know. Years passed, and the encounter slowly faded into a memory, though the unease never quite left me. I graduated from college, got a job, and moved to a nearby city. I visited my parents occasionally, but I always avoided staying overnight, using work as an excuse. The woods no longer felt like the safe haven they once were. Then, about 2 months ago, my mom called me out of the blue. Her voice had an edge of nervousness I hadn't heard before. "Do you remember that weird man in the woods?" she asked. My heart sank. "Yeah, why?" She explained that my dad had been out back, doing some yard work near the tree line, when he noticed something strange, a small pile of objects neatly arranged at the base of a tree. When he looked closer, he saw they weren't just random items. There was an old, rusted knife, a crumpled piece of paper with my name scrawled on it, and a small bundle of twigs tied together with twine. It looked like some kind of crude effigy. My dad hadn't mentioned it to her at first, thinking it was just a prank or coincidence. But when he found a second pile a few days later, this time with what looked like a torn piece of fabric from a shirt I left at their house years ago, he decided it wasn't something he could ignore. Fury, this sent me into a full-blown panic. I told my mom to call the sheriff immediately, but she hesitated. What if it's just some kids messing around? She said, "I don't want to bother anyone if it's nothing." I insisted, and thankfully she listened. The sheriff came out, took some photos, and filed a report. He promised to have someone patrol the area more frequently, but there wasn't much else he could do without more evidence. A week later, my dad called me this time. His voice was low, like he didn't want my mom to overhear. "We found a trail camera," he said. Apparently, while clearing some brush near the edge of the woods, he'd stumbled upon a small, camouflage trail camera strapped to a tree. It wasn't his, and he'd never seen it before. He brought it inside and tried to check the footage, but the memory card was missing. Someone had been watching the house. That was the final straw for me. I told my parents they needed to get out of there, at least for a while. They were reluctant. They'd lived in that house for decades, and moving wasn't something they wanted to consider. But I was terrified for them. Things went quiet for a while after that. No more piles of objects, no strange noises in the night. I started to think maybe whoever it was had moved on. But then, last week, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just a plain envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single piece of paper with 5 words scrawled in uneven handwriting. "You can't hide forever." I immediately called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. The envelope didn't have any fingerprints or clues to who had sent it. I knew in my gut it was him. Now, I'm living with this constant anxiety, checking my locks 3 times before bed, looking over my shoulder wherever I go. My parents finally agreed to install security cameras around their property, but they still refuse to move. I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. To the man in the woods, wherever you are, I don't know what you want, and I don't care. Just leave us alone. Let's not meet ever again. I lived in a small, quiet town at the time, working late shifts at a diner. My shifts often ended around midnight, and since I didn't have a car, I'd walk home, which took about 20 minutes. One night, as I was walking down the main road toward my apartment, I noticed a red car parked under a flickering streetlight. I didn't think much of it at first. Cars parked along the road were unusual, even late at night, but as I got closer, I noticed a man sitting in the driver's seat. He was staring straight ahead, not moving, and the engine was off. I felt uneasy, but I convinced myself it was nothing. People have every right to park their cars and sit in them, right? I kept walking, trying not to look directly at him, but as I passed, I felt his eyes on me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding. About a block later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine starting. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the red car pulling out and driving slowly in my direction. Panic started to set in, but I kept walking, trying not to let my fear show. Maybe he's just going in the same direction, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. But as I turned down a quieter street toward my apartment, the car turned too. It was moving at a crawl, keeping pace with me. My mind raced. I didn't want to go straight home. If he was following me, I didn't want him to know where I lived. So I decided to take a detour and head toward a gas station that stayed open late. I picked up my pace, practically jogging now. The car sped up too. That's when I heard the window roll down and the man called out, "Hey, you need a ride?" "No, thank you," I shouted back without turning around. He didn't stop. He kept following me, his car now creeping just a few feet behind me. "Come on, don't be like that. Let me give you a ride. It's not safe out here. I ignored him and broke into a full sprint, heading for the gas station. My chest was tight with fear, and I could hear the car speeding up behind me. I thought for sure he was going to hit me or block my path, but then I saw the bright lights of the gas station up ahead. The red car suddenly slammed on the brakes. I glanced back and saw it make a sharp U-turn before speeding off into the night. I stumbled into the gas station, shaking and out of breath. The cashier gave me a concerned look as I explained what had happened. He offered to call the police, but I declined. At the time, I was too scared to think clearly and convinced myself it was over. I stayed at the gas station for about an hour until I felt safe enough to walk home. After that night, I started being extra cautious on my walks home. I began taking different routes every night, even though it added extra time to my journey. I also started carrying a small can of pepper spray, just in case. For a few weeks, everything seemed fine. I didn't see the red car, and I started convincing myself that it had just been some creep who decided to move on. But then one night, something happened that brought all my fear rushing back. It was a Friday, and the diner was busier than usual. I ended up staying late to help clean up, so it was nearly 1 a.m. by the time I left. The streets were completely deserted as I started my walk home. The air was heavy and still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. About halfway home, I heard the faint sound of tires behind me. My stomach dropped. I didn't even need to turn around to know it was him. The car's engine was quiet, but the steady, deliberate pace of the vehicle trailing me was unmistakable. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and there it was, the same red car. My heart was pounding in my ears as I tried to think. I could run, but where? There was no gas station nearby this time, and I didn't want to lead him to my apartment. I spotted a narrow alley up ahead and decided to take my chances. Maybe I could lose him. I darted into the alley and started sprinting, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The alley twisted and turned, and I could hear the car's engine revving as it tried to follow from the adjacent street. I was almost out of the alley when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The red car was waiting for me at the other end. I froze, my mind racing. He must have known this alley led back to the main road. As I stood there, paralyzed, the driver's door opened and the man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and his face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. "Why are you running?" he called out, his voice cold and even. "I just want to talk." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run the other way, but before I could move, I heard another voice behind me. "Hey, what's going on here?" I turned to see a man walking his dog, staring at the red car and its driver with suspicion. The man in the red car hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the dog walker. Without a word, he got back in his car, slammed the door, and sped off. The dog walker stayed with me until I calmed down and called the police. This time, I filed a report and gave them as much detail as I could about the man and his car. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, but they never found him. After I moved, things were peaceful for a while. I found a new job in an apartment in a much busier area of a nearby city. It felt good to finally be somewhere I didn't feel the constant need to look over my shoulder. I even convinced myself that the man in the red car was a distant, eerie memory, something I could leave behind like the small town I'd escaped from. But then, about 6 months after I'd settled into my new place, I received a package. It was a small, nondescript brown box with no return address. At first, I thought it was a delivery mistake. I wasn't expecting anything, but curiosity got the better of me, so I opened it. Inside was a single item, a cheap plastic keychain in the shape of a red car. My heart dropped. My mind immediately raced back to that night and the man who had followed me. There was no note, no explanation, just the keychain. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. I threw the keychain away, locked all my doors, and spent the rest of the night trying to rationalize what had happened. How would he know where I lived? Was it really him, or was I just being paranoid? Either way, I decided not to take any chances. The next morning, I reported it to the police. The officer I spoke to took me seriously, which was a relief. He told me to be cautious and to keep any further packages or correspondence that might arrive. He also suggested changing up my routines, like when I left for work or came home, and recommended installing a security camera. I followed his advice to the letter. Weeks went by and nothing else happened. I started to relax, thinking maybe it really had been a coincidence. But then, one evening as I was coming home, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Parked a few houses down from my apartment was a red car. It wasn't the exact same one. I'd memorized the old one's shape and details, but this one was eerily similar. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see inside, but it felt like someone was watching me. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, debating whether to go inside or keep walking. I decided to keep walking. I circled the block and called a friend, asking them to come meet me. When we returned together about 15 minutes later, the car was gone. At this point, I knew I was being watched. I doubled down on my security measures, adding extra locks, upgrading my security camera, and even sleeping with a weapon close by. I also started carpooling to and from work with a coworker, making sure I was never alone. For for a while, nothing happened, no more packages, no sign of the car. I began to think maybe he had moved on, but then one night while reviewing my security camera footage, I saw him. The man was standing in my driveway, just outside the camera's range, staring at my apartment. He was wearing the same dark jacket and hood. He stood there for several minutes, motionless, before slowly walking back toward the street. I couldn't see where he went, but it was enough to shatter any sense of safety I had left. I called the police immediately and showed them the footage. They promised to patrol the area and keep an eye out, but they admitted there wasn't much they could do unless he directly threatened me. That was the last straw. I packed up and moved again, this time to a new city and a completely different state. It's been over a year since then, and I haven't seen or heard anything unusual, but I still live with the lingering fear that he's out there, waiting, watching, planning. To the man in the red car, I don't know who you are, and I don't care to know, but if you ever come near me again, I won't run. I'll be ready. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was about an hour away from my house. The road I was on was long, mostly surrounded by trees, with only the occasional flickering streetlight. I had my music playing low and was sipping on the cold coffee I picked up at a gas station earlier when I saw something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe trash someone had left, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a man. He was waving his arms in a slow, almost robotic motion, signaling for help. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. My gut told me to keep driving, but I couldn't help feeling bad. What if he was hurt or stranded? I stopped the car a little ahead of him and cracked my window just enough to talk. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. The man jogged up to my window. His clothes were dirty, his face pale, and his eyes. There was something wrong with his eyes. They didn't seem to focus on me, as if he was looking just past me. I ran out of gas. He said in a monotone voice, "Can you give me a ride to the nearest station?" My skin crawled. Something about it just felt off. I glanced at the road behind me, completely empty. No other cars, no witnesses. "Sorry," I said quickly, "but I can call someone for you." He tilted his head, staring at me for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's okay," he said softly. "I'll just wait." He backed away from my car, but he didn't step off the road. Instead, he just stood there watching me. His hands hung limply at his sides, and his smile stayed fixed on his face. I didn't waste another second. I drove off, keeping an eye on him in my rearview mirror. As my car gained speed, he turned and started walking down the road in the opposite direction. A few minutes later, I saw headlights approaching from behind. Relieved that someone else was on the road, I slowed down slightly, but as the car passed me, I noticed something chilling. It was the same man. He was sitting in the passenger seat of the car, staring directly at me. I don't know how he got picked up so quickly or how he managed to be in that car, but I didn't stick around to find out. I floored it and didn't stop until I reached my driveway. After that night, I tried to convince myself it was all just a strange coincidence. Maybe the guy had somehow flagged down another driver right after I left. Maybe he wasn't as airy as he seemed in the dark, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It started small. I'd get the sense that I wasn't alone when walking to my car, or I'd hear faint noises outside my house at night. At first, I told myself I was just being paranoid. My mind played tricks on me because of the encounter, but then the incidents got harder to explain. One night, about a week after the drive, I was getting ready for bed when I heard what sounded like tapping on the living room window. It was faint, irregular, but distinct enough to catch my attention. My heart sank. I turned off the lights and crept toward the window, peeking through the curtains. Nothing, just the empty street outside. I tried to laugh it off and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my front door rattling as if someone was trying to turn the knob. My chest tightened. I grabbed my phone and stayed perfectly still, listening. The rattling stopped, but I swear I could hear faint breathing on the other side of the door. I called the police. When they arrived, they didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. They told me it was probably a prank or my imagination, but I knew better. The next morning, I noticed something chilling. My car, parked in the driveway, had a smear of dirt on the driver's side window, like someone had pressed their hand against it. There were also faint streaks, as if they had been peering inside. I felt sick. I decided to stay at a friend's place for a few nights. While I was gone, I set up a cheap security camera pointed at my front door. When I reviewed the footage after returning, my worst fears were confirmed. At around 2:30 a.m., the camera caught a figure standing in my driveway. It was blurry and dark, but I recognized the posture, the way his head tilted slightly to the side. It was him. He stood there for what felt like hours, motionless, staring at my front door. Then, just before dawn, he walked away and disappeared down the street. I called the police again, showing them the footage. They took it more seriously this time, but they still didn't have much to go on. I changed my locks, installed more cameras, and even started parking my car in the garage. The visit stopped after that. Weeks passed, then months, and I began to feel normal again. But every so often, I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that I've heard that faint tapping on the window again. Life eventually settled down, but the unease never fully left me. Even though the visits seemed to have stopped, I became hypervigilant. I'd double check every lock, glance over my shoulder when walking to my car, and take alternate routes home just in case. My friends thought I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the paranoia. About 6 months after the initial encounter, I was finally starting to relax. I convinced myself it was over, that whoever that man was, he had moved on. I even began going out more, trying to reclaim my life. One night, I stayed late at a friend's house for a game night. It was fun, almost enough to make me forget everything, but as I was driving home, that familiar unease crept in. The road was eerily similar to the one where I'd first seen him, dark, quiet, lined with trees. My heart started racing, and I couldn't stop glancing in my rearview mirror. At first, it was empty, but then, about 10 minutes from home, headlights appeared in the distance behind me. They seemed harmless at first, just another car heading the same direction. But as I drove, they stayed uncomfortably close, matching my speed no matter how fast or slow I went. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. But when I turned onto my street, the car followed. My stomach dropped. I slowed down, hoping they'd pass me, but they didn't. Instead, they kept their distance, trailing just far enough behind to stay in the shadows. I didn't pull into my driveway. Instead, I kept driving, looping around the block. The car followed every turn I made. That's when I knew I was being hunted. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I didn't want to lead them to my house, but I also didn't want to stop somewhere isolated. Finally, I remembered there was a 24-hour gas station a few miles away. I drove there, pulling into the brightly lit parking lot and parking right next to the entrance. The car didn't follow me in. Instead, it idled on the street for a moment before speeding off into the night. I sat there for a while, trying to calm my shaking hands. When I finally felt steady enough to drive, I asked the gas station attendant to watch me leave. He agreed, standing at the door as I drove off. I took the long way home, circling a few extra blocks just to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I finally got home, I parked in the garage and locked every door and window. For the next few nights, I barely slept, jumping at every noise. Then, one morning, I found something that sent chills down my spine. On my front porch was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. Written on it in shaky handwriting were 3 words, "I'll be back." I called the police again, but once again, there was little they could do. They suggested I install more cameras and maybe even get a security system. I did everything they recommended and even considered moving, but I couldn't afford to. It's been years since then, and I've never seen him again. But the fear never fully goes away. Every time I walk to my car or hear a noise at night, I wonder if he's out there, waiting, watching. I don't know why he targeted me or what he wanted, but I pray I'll never find out. It was a dingy little place in an older building, but it was cheap, and I was just starting out. The layout was basic, a long hallway with several apartments on each side, ending in a fire exit that opened onto the alley below. Most of my neighbors were quiet, and I didn't see them often, but there was one man who stood out. He lived at the very end of the hall, in the apartment next to the fire exit. I never learned his name, but I always called him the man at the end of the hall in my head. He was, I'd pass him in the hallway, and he'd just stare at me without saying a word. Not a polite nod, not a smile, just this unnervingly blank expression. He was tall and thin, with sunken cheeks and greasy black hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. Something about him felt off, but I tried to brush it off. He never actually did anything, so I figured he was just socially awkward or maybe going through a rough time. Then things started getting weird. It began with small, almost imperceptible things. I'd come home to find my apartment door unlocked when I was sure I had locked it. I'd hear faint footsteps in the hallway late at night, even though most of my neighbors were older and went to bed early. Once, I swore I heard someone trying my door handle, but when I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. One night, I came home late after a shift at work. The hallway lights were dim. One of the bulbs had burned out near the fire exit, leaving the end of the hall in shadows. As I walked toward my door, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, and there he was, the man at the end of the hall. He was standing in the shadows, staring at me, but this time, he had a faint smile on his face. It wasn't friendly, it was predatory. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. He just kept staring, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. My skin crawled, and I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep well that night, or the night after. Something about the way he looked at me stuck in my mind, like a splinter I couldn't remove. I started avoiding him, timing my comings and goings so I wouldn't run into him. But one night, everything came to a head. It was around 2 a.m., and I was woken up by a noise, a faint scraping sound, like metal on wood. I froze, straining to hear. It was coming from the hallway, right outside outside my door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. He was there. The man at the end of the hall was crouched down, fiddling with my door handle. In his hand was what looked like a screwdriver or some kind of tool. He was trying to break in. I backed away, my hand shaking as I grabbed my phone and called the police. I whispered to the operator, explaining the situation as quietly as I could. The scraping stopped, and for a horrifying moment, I thought he might have heard me. But when I looked through the peephole again, he was gone. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, but it felt like hours. They searched the building and the alley, but they didn't find him. However, they did find evidence that he'd been tampering with my door lock. They advised me to stay somewhere else for the night, and I didn't argue. The next morning, I went to the building manager and told him everything. He was shocked but promised to look into it. A few days later, I learned that the man at the end of the hall had been evicted. Apparently, he hadn't been paying rent, and when they went to inspect his apartment, they found it completely trashed. Holes in the walls, piles of garbage, and photos of me. There were pictures of me walking to my car, checking my mail, even sitting in my apartment, taken through the gap in my curtains. I moved out immediately and never looked back. After I moved out, I tried my best to put it all behind me, but it wasn't easy. For weeks, I felt like I was being watched, even in my new apartment. I double-checked all my locks, kept the curtains tightly closed, and installed a security camera by my front door. My friends told me I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. A few months went by without incident, and I started to relax. Maybe he really was just some creepy loner who fixated on me for a while. Maybe it was over. I wanted to believe that. Then one night, I found a package on my doorstep. It didn't have a return address, just my name written in messy, almost childlike handwriting. My stomach dropped. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it, my instincts screaming at me not to touch it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I brought it inside. I opened the box carefully, half expecting something horrible to jump out. Inside was a single item, a photograph. It was me, taken recently at my new apartment. I was walking out the front door, completely unaware. Written on the back, in the same messy handwriting, were the words, "I found you." I called the police immediately, but there wasn't much they could do. Without any concrete evidence of who sent it, they couldn't make an arrest. I showed them the photo and explained everything, but all they could do was file a report and tell me to be careful. Terrified, I installed more security cameras, got pepper spray, and even started taking self-defense classes. But the worst part was the waiting. Every time I left my apartment, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to be there. Every time I heard a noise outside, I thought he was coming for me. Then one night, it happened. I was in bed, scrolling on my phone, when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps outside my window. My heart sank. My new apartment was on the second floor, so there shouldn't have been anyone out there. I grabbed my phone and crept to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. There he was. The man from the end of the hall was standing on the fire escape, staring directly at me. He had that same twisted smile on his face, like he was enjoying my fear. In his hand, he'd held something shiny, a knife. I didn't hesitate. I called the police, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. I told the dispatcher what was happening and that I was alone. The operator stayed on the line with me, telling me to stay calm and that help was on the way. But then I heard it, the sound of the window latch being jiggled. He was trying to get in. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a heavy lamp, and stood by the door, ready to defend myself if he broke through. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I could hear him muttering to himself, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance, and he bolted. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. This time, they took me seriously. They combed the area, but once again, they didn't find him. The officers stayed with me while I packed a bag, and I went to stay with a friend for a while. I couldn't bear to be alone. Eventually, I moved again, this time to a different city, and I've done everything I can to stay off the radar. No social media, no forwarding address, nothing that could lead him to me. I still don't know how he found me after I moved the first time, but I can't let my guard down. Even after moving to a new city and going completely off-grid, I couldn't shake the lingering fear. I was hyper aware of every little thing, footsteps behind me on a quiet street, an unfamiliar car parked outside, even just a wrong number call. I kept telling myself that I was safe now, but my nerves refused to believe it. Months turned into a year, and nothing happened. No mysterious packages, no unnerving encounters, nothing. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I found a new job, made a few friends, and even started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma. For the first time in a long while, I felt normal again. Until last week. It was a Friday night, and I had plans to meet some friends for dinner. As I was leaving my apartment, I noticed a small piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was just a flyer or some junk, but when I pulled it out, my stomach dropped. It was a note. "You look happy. I'm glad you're settling in. No name, no signature. signature, just that chilling message. My hands started shaking, and I immediately scanned the area, looking for anyone who might be watching me. The parking lot was mostly empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I canceled my plans and went straight to the police. They were sympathetic, but said there wasn't much they could do without a clear threat or evidence of who had left the note. They advised me to stay vigilant and report any further incidents. That night, I barely slept. I stayed up with every light in my apartment on, clutching the baseball bat I kept under my bed. Every little creak or sound outside sent me into a panic, but the night passed without incident. The next morning, I decided to review the footage from the security cameras I had installed around my apartment. Most of the recordings showed nothing unusual, just the occasional neighbor walking by our cars pulling in and out. But then, around 3 a.m., I saw the man from the end of the hall. He was standing just outside the range of one of the cameras, barely visible in the shadows. He must have known about the cameras because he never stepped fully into view, but I recognized his silhouette, the lanky frame, the hunched posture. He stood there for what felt like hours, just watching my apartment. At one point, he leaned forward as if trying to get a better look, then slipped away into the darkness. I felt sick. He had found me again. I packed a bag that same day and left town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I rented a room in a small motel several towns away and started looking for another place to live. I've done this enough times now that it feels almost routine. Find a new apartment, change all my contact information, install more cameras, and pray that he doesn't find me again. I don't know how he keeps tracking me down. I've considered everything. He could be hacking into my information somehow, following me without my knowledge, or maybe it's something even more sinister. All I know is that I can't let my guard down, not for a second. So, to the man at the end of the hall, I don't know why you're doing this. I don't know what you want or how you keep finding me, but I know one thing. I've always been pretty independent, so the idea of staying alone in an Arab bit of quiet village in France didn't faze me. Looking back now, I wish I had been a little more cautious. The Arab was an old cottage on the outskirts of town. It was charming, with creaky wooden floors and ivy climbing up the walls. The host, Sylvie, messaged me beforehand, letting me know she wouldn't be there to greet me, but I left the key in a lockbox by the door. Everything seemed perfectly normal. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun was setting. After finding the key and settling in, I made myself some tea and curled up with a book. It was incredibly peaceful until it wasn't. Around 10 p.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps outside the cottage. At first, I brushed it off as a stray animal or maybe a neighbor passing by, but then I heard the distinct sound of the front door handle rattling. My stomach dropped. I froze, clutching my phone, debating whether to call someone or check it out myself. After what felt like an eternity, the rattling stopped. I peeked through the curtains but couldn't see anyone. Trying to shake off the nerves, I convinced myself it was nothing and went to bed. At 3 a.m., I woke up to a creak. Not just any creak, the kind that comes from old wooden floors inside the house. I didn't dare move. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was inside could probably hear it. I strained to listen, and that's when I heard it again, soft, deliberate footsteps. Grabbing my phone, I dialed the emergency number for France but couldn't bring myself to hit call. I didn't know if I was overreacting, and the idea of a language barrier made me hesitate. Instead, I texted Sylvie to ask if anyone else had access to the house. No reply. The footsteps got closer, heading toward the room I was in. I quietly slid out of bed, grabbed my small pocket knife, and positioned myself behind the door. My mind raced with every worst case scenario. The doorknob turned. I didn't wait to see who or what it was. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "I'm calling the police," and lunged toward the door. From ever it was bolted. I heard their footsteps thundering down the stairs and the front door slamming shut. Still shaking, I locked myself in the bedroom and actually called the police this time. They arrived about 30 minutes later, but whoever had been there was long gone. They found the lockbox outside open and the spare key missing. The weirdest part, when Sylvie finally got back to me, she told me she had no idea who it could have been. She didn't have any cleaners or maintenance scheduled, and the lockbox had been intact when she checked it earlier that week. Needless to say, I cut my trip short and left the next morning. I've stayed in plenty of Arabs since, but I always double check every lock, and I've never gone back to that cottage. After returning home, I tried to put the whole experience behind me. I told a few close friends and family members who all had the same reaction, shock, followed by concern for my safety. Most chalked it up to some random thief or drifter who saw an opportunity, but the whole situation didn't sit right with me. A few weeks later, I received a message from Ambient. They were following up on my stay at Sylvie's property, which I had reported after the incident. To my surprise, they informed me that another guest had experienced something similar, someone attempting to enter the cottage during the night. The guest had also left early and filed a complaint, which led Ambient to investigate. The revelation was chilling. This wasn't a one-off, and it likely wasn't random. him. I reached out to Sylvie again, hoping to get more details. This time, she seemed a little more forthcoming. She admitted that, a few months before my stay, she'd had issues with her ex-partner. He was controlling and refused to accept their breakup. She claimed he had shown up uninvited at the cottage before, but assured me she thought the situation was under control. Under control, the spare key had gone missing, and someone had been creeping around her property at night. It seemed like she was trying to downplay everything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. I pushed Aird for more information, but privacy policies kept them from sharing specifics about the other guests' experience. All they would say was that the listing had been removed while they conducted their investigation. I was left with more questions than answers. Was it Sylvie's ex, someone who had stayed there before and copied the key, or was it a local who knew the property well? Whatever the case, I'm just grateful I listened to my instincts that night. Even now, I occasionally wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I've heard someone creeping around. It's a fear that stays with you, that little voice whispering, what if? Months passed, and life moved on, but the experience stayed with me. Occasionally, I'd find myself googling Sylvie's village, checking the news for anything suspicious or related to break-ins or arrests. Nothing ever came up. It was as if the whole thing had been a bad dream. But then, one day, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line simply read, about the cottage. My stomach twisted as I opened it. The email was brief. I'm sorry about what happened. I didn't mean to scare you. I was looking for Sylvie. She didn't tell me someone else was staying there. I'll leave you alone now. No name, no details, and no way to reply. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Was it Sylvie's ex? Someone else? And how had they gotten my email? Arab is supposed to keep that information private. Did Sylvie give it to them? Or had they found another way to track me down? I forwarded the email to Arab immediately, demanding an explanation. Their response was polite but unhelpful. They assured me their systems were secure and suggested I change my email password just in case. They also reiterated that Sylvie's listing had been permanently removed. That night, as I tried to fall asleep, my mind replayed every detail of the email. I didn't mean to scare you. It was such a strange choice of words. If they didn't mean to scare me, why creep around the house in the middle of the night? Why try the doorknob? None of it made sense. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. In the timestamp of the email, the sender had used a different time zone. A small clue, but enough to suggest they were still in Europe. That ruled out a random hacker or scammer. This was personal. I blocked the sender and changed every password I could think of. I even contacted the police in France, forwarding them the email and recounting the story in detail. They were sympathetic but said there wasn't much they could do unless the person made direct contact again. Weeks passed and nothing else happened. But then, late one night, I got another email. This time, it was just a single line. You're safe now. No context, no explanation. It didn't make me feel safe at all. Since then, I've done my best to let it go, but I can't help but wonder, was it really Sylvie's ex? Was it someone else entirely? And what did they mean by you're safe now? Had something happened to them or to Sylvie? I never heard from her again, and the cottage seems to have disappeared entirely from rental sites. So, to the person who sent those cryptic emails, I hope you really have moved on. And to Sylvie, wherever you are, I hope you're okay. But to whoever was behind that door, to whoever thought it was okay to terrify a stranger in the middle of the night, let's absolutely never meet. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and at the time, I was working the evening shift at a coffee shop. My shift ended around 11 p.m., and because the shop was in a quieter part of town, the parking lot was usually empty by then. That night started like any other. I finished up, locked the doors, and walked out to my car, which was parked near the edge of the lot, close to the tree line. It was one of those nights where the air felt heavier than usual, but I didn't think much of it. I was just eager to get home. As I got closer to my car, I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. A man was standing about 10 feet away from it. Just staring. He wasn't moving or saying anything, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, facing me. He looked like he was in his late 40s, dressed in a dark hoodie and jeans. I hesitated, thinking maybe he was just lost or waiting for someone, but something about him felt off. I cleared my throat and tried to sound casual. Oh, can I help you? He didn't respond. His face was partially in shadow, but I could see enough to know he was smiling, this weird, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. Now I was getting nervous. My car was the only one left in the lot, so it was obvious I was alone. I decided to play it safe. I turned around and started walking back toward the coffee shop. That's when I heard him speak, and his voice made my skin crawl. You forgot something. I stopped but didn't turn around. My keys were in my hand. My bag was slung over my shoulder. What could I have forgotten? Before I could respond, he added, "Come here. I'll show you." Nope, absolutely not. At this point, every instinct in me was screaming to get out of there. I picked up my pace and made it back to the shop door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the key, leave, but I managed to get inside and lock the door behind me. Through the glass, I saw him still standing there, but now he was closer to my car. He was holding something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but he waved it at me like he was trying to taunt me. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the tree line. I stayed in the shop for another 20 minutes, calling a friend to come pick me up. When they arrived, we checked around my car together. There was nothing unusual, except for a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It just said, "See you soon," in messy, scrawled handwriting. After that night, my anxiety went into overdrive. I'd been independent for years, but suddenly I couldn't bring myself to go anywhere alone, especially at night. The sight of any man loitering around made my heart race. My friends and family tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just some weirdo trying to scare me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. About 2 weeks after the parking lot incident, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. First, it was a car, a beat-up, dark sedan that I kept seeing parked near the coffee shop when I arrived from my shifts. It wasn't in the customer lot, but rather across the street, facing the building. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, but then I started noticing it at other places too, near my gym, on the street by my apartment, even outside my grocery store. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. Plenty of people have old sedans, right? But then came the second thing. One night, as I was locking up the shop, I found another note. This time, it wasn't on my car but taped to the back door of the building. It was the same messy handwriting as before, but this time it said, "Miss me." My blood ran cold. I didn't tell my coworkers because I didn't want to freak them out, but I did call the police again. They sent an officer out, but once again, there wasn't much they could do without a suspect or tangible threat. A few days later, I came home from work and found my apartment door unlocked. I froze. I was 100% sure I had locked it when I left that morning. My heart was pounding as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Nothing looked out of place at first, but then I saw it, a single red rose on my kitchen counter. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just some random creep trying to scare me. He had been inside my home. He knew where I lived. I called the police again, and this time, they took it more seriously. They checked for signs of forced entry but didn't find any. They suggested that maybe I had left the door unlocked, but I knew I hadn't. I started staying with a friend after that because there was no way I was sleeping in that apartment alone. The scariest part, the notes didn't stop. Every few days, I'd find one in places I couldn't explain, slipped into my locker at work, tucked under my windshield wiper, even inside my gym bag. Each one was more unsettling than the last. One just said, "Soon." I eventually decided to move. I couldn't handle the constant fear anymore, and the police weren't offering much help. I changed jobs, switched apartments, and even got a new car to try and break the pattern. For a while, it worked. I didn't see the dark sedan again, and the notes stopped coming. But then, a few months ago, I got a text from an unknown number. It just said, "You look good in red." I had been wearing a red sweater that day. After that text, I felt my entire body lock up with fear. I sat on my couch for hours, staring at my phone and trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just some random spam message or a cruel coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't respond to the text, but I forwarded it to the police. They assured me they would look into it, but given how little they'd been able to do in the past, I didn't have high hopes. I changed my phone number the next day, but the damage was already done. I knew he had found me again, and no number or lock or distance was going to stop him. A week later, I was at home, trying to relax and put it out of my mind. I had all the curtains drawn and the doors triple checked. I was watching TV when I heard a faint sound outside, a soft tapping, almost rhythmic, like something brushing against the window. My heart dropped. I froze, listening intently. The tapping stopped, and for a few moments, everything was silent. Then came a new sound, a faint scratching, like nails dragging along the glass. I wanted to believe it was just the wind or maybe a tree branch, but I couldn't convince myself. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the nearest window. Slowly, I lifted the corner of the curtain and peeked outside. There, in the glow of the porch light, was a man. He was standing just a few feet from my window, his face partially obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt, but I could see his smile, that same tight-lipped, unsettling grin that haunted my dreams. In his hand was a single red rose. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone as I dialed 911. When the operator picked up, I could barely form a coherent sentence. I managed to tell them there was a man outside my window and begged them to send someone immediately. When I dared to look out again, he was gone, just vanished, like he had never been there. But on the window pane, scrawled in something dark and wet, were 3 words, "See you soon." The police arrived within minutes, but as always, they found found nothing. No footprints, no rows, no trace of the man who had been there just moments before. They told me it could have been a prank, maybe some kids messing around, but I knew better. It was him. After that, I couldn't stay in that house. I packed up and moved in with a friend, explaining only that I was dealing with a stalker. They were understanding and let me crash in their guest room while I tried to figure out what to do next. But the scariest part of all this, even though I haven't seen him again since that night, I still feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes, I'll catch a glimpse of a dark sedan in my rearview mirror, or I'll feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I'm walking alone. For context, I'm a 24-year-old woman, and at the time, I was working a late shift at an office building downtown. My job sometimes required me to stay until midnight, and the building would mostly empty out by 7 p.m. The break room was on the second floor, and there was a small vending machine alcove just outside of it. It wasn't visible from the hallway, and you had to turn a corner to get to it. I usually avoided it because it felt so isolated, but one night, my stomach was growling, and I was craving something salty. It was almost 11 p.m., and the building was dead silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I walked to the vending machines, rounded the corner, and froze. There was a man standing there. He wasn't an employee, at least not one I'd ever seen before, and something about him felt off. He wasn't looking at the vending machines or even at me. He was standing with his back against the wall, staring down the hallway I'd just come from, like he was waiting for someone. Hi, I said, trying to act casual. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and he didn't say anything, just stared. I nervously laughed and walked to the vending machine, trying to pretend like he wasn't creeping me out. I fumbled with the buttons, but my hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't even pick what I wanted. All the while, I could feel his eyes on me. You shouldn't be here this late, he finally said, his voice low and almost monotone. I glanced at him, trying to gauge if he was dangerous or just socially awkward. I work here, I said, forcing a smile. I just needed a snack. He tilted his head, like he didn't believe me. No one works this late. He said, not really. Okay. That was my cue to leave. Have a good night, I said, grabbing my bag and turning back toward the hallway. As I started to walk away, I heard him mutter something, but I couldn't make out the words. I glanced over my shoulder, and he was still standing there, staring at me. I hurried back to my office, locked the door, and called security. They came up to check, but by the time they got there, the guy was gone. There was no record of anyone signing in or being on the cameras in that area, which only made the whole thing creepier. I ended up quitting that job a few weeks later, partly because of that encounter and partly because I just couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A few weeks after I quit, I started having these strange moments where I felt like I was being followed. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia from the vending machine incident. I mean, who wouldn't be a little jumpy after something like that? But then, the feeling got stronger. One day, I was at the grocery store, standing in the checkout line, when I saw someone out of the corner of my eye. He was a man, tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie. He wasn't looking at me, but he was standing way too still, like he was trying not to draw attention. I turned to get a better look, but he was gone. It was probably just my imagination, or so I tried to convince myself. But over the next few days, I kept seeing him. Once outside my apartment building, just standing by a lamppost. Another time in the parking lot of a coffee shop, watching from across the street. He always seemed to vanish the moment I tried to focus on him, like a shadow slipping away. Then, one night, something happened that I still can't fully explain. I was in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a soft tapping on my bedroom window. I live on the second floor, so my first thought was that it must have been a branch or some animal. But when I looked, I saw the faint outline of a face pressed against the glass. I screamed and grabbed my phone to call 911, but by the time I turned back to the window, the face was gone. The police came and looked around but didn't find anything. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, nothing. They said it was probably a prank, maybe some neighborhood kid messing around. But deep down, I knew it was a After that, I started staying with a friend. I couldn't handle being alone in my apartment, especially at night. I installed new locks, got security cameras, even bought pepper spray, but I never felt safe. The man seemed to disappear after that night, but I could never shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. To this day, I have no idea who he was or why he targeted me. Was it random? Did I do something to catch his attention that night in the vending machine room? Or had he been watching me long before that? I've moved twice since then, and I've tried to put it all behind me, but every once in a while, I'll catch a glimpse of someone in a crowd or hear an unexpected noise late at night. and my heart will race, wondering if he's finally come back. I hope he hasn't. Life eventually settled into a new rhythm, and the unsettling memories of the vending machine man began to fade, though they never disappeared entirely. I took extra precautions everywhere I went, always double checking locks and watching my surroundings. I never stayed out late anymore, and I avoided isolated places like the plague. About a year later, I had almost convinced myself that it was over. Maybe it had just been a string of random, unconnected events that my mind had stitched into something bigger. I was starting to feel normal again, or at least as normal as one could feel after something like that. Then, one night, it happened again. I was driving home from dinner with friends. It was late, but the streets were well lit, and I hadn't felt the creeping unease I usually got when I was out after dark. I pulled into my apartment complex and parked my car in my usual spot. As I was gathering my things from the passenger seat, I noticed movement in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was a neighbor walking by, but the figure wasn't moving toward any of the buildings. They were just standing there. I froze, my hand halfway to the door handle. The figure was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie. Even in the dim light of the parking lot, I could tell they were staring directly at my car. My stomach dropped. It was him. It had to be. I didn't know what to do. My phone was in my bag, and the last thing I wanted was to make a sudden move. I decided to wait him out, hoping he'd lose interest and leave. But he didn't. He just stood there, completely still, like he was waiting for me to make the first move. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, I worked up the courage to grab my phone and call 911. As I fumbled with it, the figure suddenly started walking, slowly, deliberately, toward my car. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. I locked the doors and pressed myself back against the seat, praying he would go away. When he reached my car, he stopped right outside the driver's side window. His face was obscured by the hood, but I could feel his eyes on me, piercing through the glass. He didn't say anything, didn't try to open the door. He just stood there as if he was savoring the moment. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear, pulling me out of my frozen state. I quickly explained what was happening, and they assured me that officers were on their way. But I couldn't wait. The man began tapping on the window, a slow, rhythmic sound that made my skin crawl. Then he leaned in closer, and I swear I heard him whisper, "I told you, you shouldn't be here." That was it. I started my car and reversed out of the parking spot so fast that I almost hit the car behind me. The man didn't follow. He just stood there, watching as I sped away. I drove to the nearest police station and waited there until they sent someone to check my apartment. They didn't find anyone, but I refused to go back that night. I stayed at a hotel instead and spent the entire night replaying the encounter in my mind, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't locked my doors. The next day, I broke my lease. I didn't even bother going back to pack most of my things. I hired a moving company to do it for me. I moved to a new city, changed my phone number, and even started using a different name on social media. It's been 3 years since that night, and I haven't seen him again. But sometimes, when I'm walking to my car or sitting alone in my apartment, I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to show up again. I live in a pretty quiet town in the Midwest, and the stretch of road leading to my neighborhood is long, winding, and surrounded by dense forest. It's one of those roads where your headlights are the only source of light, and every shadow seems alive. That night, I was coming back from visiting a friend who lived 2 towns over. It was around 1 a.m., and I hadn't seen another car for miles. I had the radio on low, more for company than anything else, and my windows were cracked to let in the cool night air. About halfway home, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They appeared out of nowhere, coming up fast behind me. At first, I thought it was someone in a hurry, but as the car got closer, it slowed down and kept an unsettlingly even pace behind me. I figured they might be trying to pass, so I moved slightly to the side, but they didn't budge. The car stayed right on my tail, uncomfortably close. It was an old, beat-up sedan, dark, maybe black or navy blue, and its headlights seemed almost too bright, like they'd been tampered with. I tried to shake it off as some jerk trying to mess with me. I accelerated a little, hoping to put some distance between us, but the car matched my speed perfectly. Every twist and turn of the road, they stayed right there, unwavering. The tension started to build. My grip tightened on the wheel, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just some impatient driver anymore. It felt personal. I decided I'd turn off onto a side road, one I knew led back to the main highway eventually, just to see if they'd follow. As soon as I made the turn, they followed. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to lead them to my neighborhood, so I kept driving, taking random turns, trying to lose them. Each time, they mirrored my movements exactly. Then, in the distance, distance, I saw the faint glow of a gas station. It was closed, but the parking lot was well lit. I decided to pull in, hoping they'd drive past or at least hesitate. As I turned into the lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror and the car was gone. I mean, God, 1 second they were there, their headlights glaring into my car, and the next, the road behind me was empty. I stopped the car, my chest heaving with panic, and scanned the area. There was no sign of them, no taillights, no sound of an engine retreating into the night. Nothing. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe they'd turned off when I wasn't looking, though that seemed impossible given how close they'd been. Finally, I mustered the courage to drive home, constantly checking my mirrors, half expecting them to reappear. But they didn't. When I got home, I locked every door and window, then sat in the dark with a baseball bat, jumping at every noise. I never saw that car again, but I still avoid driving that road at night. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I got in my car, I found myself compulsively checking my mirrors, half expecting those blinding headlights to appear again. I even considered talking to someone about what happened, but I didn't want to sound crazy. After all, how do you explain a car that just vanishes? One night, about a month later, I was hanging out at a friend's house. We were swapping spooky stories, mostly dumb urban legends, when I casually mentioned the car. The room went quiet. My friend Nick, who grew up in the same town, looked at me with a strange expression. Wait, he said, where exactly were you when that happened? I described the stretch of road, and his face went pale. He leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck like he didn't want to tell me what he was thinking. You're not gonna like this, he said, but there's this story people used to tell in high school. They say there was a guy, like decades ago, who would drive that road late at night looking for people to mess with. He'd tailgate them, freak them out, sometimes even run them off the road. Supposedly, one night he picked a wrong car. He ended up in a wreck, died instantly. His car got totaled, but like, people swear they've seen it since. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. Come on, that's just a dumb ghost story. Nick shrugged, but my cousin swears he saw it once. Same thing you described, a beat up old car with those blinding lights. He said it followed him all the way to the edge of town and then just disappeared. I didn't sleep well that night. As much as I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, or maybe even my mind playing tricks on me, the details were too specific. And the more I thought about it, the more little things started to add up. Like how the headlights seemed impossibly bright, almost unnatural, or how the car matched every turn I made, as if it knew where I was going. And then there was the eerie silence when it disappeared. No sound of tires on gravel, no hum of an engine fading into the distance. Just nothing. The final straw came a couple of weeks later. I was cleaning out my car when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A faint smear of dirt on my back bumper, shaped almost like a handprint. It wasn't there before, and I couldn't think of any reason it would be now. It was as if someone, or something, had reached out and touched my car that night. I've avoided that road ever since. If I have to drive anywhere late at night, I take the long way around, even if it adds half an hour to my trip. And every time I pass that turnoff, I feel a chill run down my spine. A few months passed, and while I avoided that road, the experience never fully left me. Little things would trigger my anxiety, bright headlights at my rearview mirror, the sound of tires crunching gravel, even the thought of driving at night. I tried to push it out of my mind, but every now and then, the memories crept back in. Then one night, it happened again. I was coming home late from work. It was winter, and the sun had set hours earlier. My usual route was blocked due to an accident, so I had no choice but to take the long, windy road I'd been avoiding. My stomach churned as I turned onto it, the dark trees towering on either side like walls. I kept telling myself it was fine. It was just a road. Nothing would happen. The odds of encountering that car again were astronomically low. Right about halfway down the stretch, my radio started to crackle. Static interrupted the music, growing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. I fiddled with the dial, but it wouldn't stop. Then the headlights appeared. At first, they were faint in the distance, but as I glanced into my rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. It was the same car. The beat-up sedan with its blindingly bright headlights was back, barely toward me like it had been waiting for this moment. My hands gripped the wheel as I felt my heart leap into my throat. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just another driver, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. As before, the car sped up until it was right on my bumper, its lights glaring into my car like twin suns. This time, I wasn't going to let it intimidate me. I floored the gas, determined to outrun it. My car roared as it surged forward, but the sedan kept pace effortlessly. Every turn I took, every maneuver I tried to lose it, the car stayed glued to my tail. Then, the headlights flickered. For a split second, they blinked out, plunging the road behind me into darkness. When they came back, the car was closer, impossibly so, as if it had gained several feet in an instant. My panic surged. It wasn't just following me, it was toying with me. Desperate, I decided to head toward the nearest populated area, a small gas station a few miles down the road. I knew it was risky. The last time I tried this, the car had vanished, but I needed to do something. wrong. As I approached the station, the car behind me did something that made my blood freeze. Its horn blared. Not a normal car horn, but this long, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the entire forest. It was distorted, almost unnatural, like a scream filtered through static. When I pulled into the gas station's lot, I slammed on my brakes and whipped my car around to face the road. But the sedan wasn't there. Just like before, it had vanished. The road was empty, the forest silent. I sat there, trembling, staring at the empty stretch of asphalt. The gas station was closed, and the lights inside flickered weakly. For a moment, I debated calling someone, anyone, to come get me. But who would believe me? I didn't even fully believe it myself. Then I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A figure stood at the edge of the forest, just barely illuminated by my taillights. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me, but I felt its gaze like a physical weight. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to get as far away as possible. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I slammed my car into reverse, then sped out of the lot and back toward town. I didn't look back, not once. When I got home, I parked my car in the garage, locked every door and window, and sat in the dark with my phone clutched in my hand. I debated calling the police, but couldn't bring myself to do it. What could I even say? That was the last time I saw the car or the figure. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that horn, that impossible sound that still echoes in my mind, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't made it to the gas station, to the driver of the beat-up sedan, or whatever was waiting for me in the forest. Let's not meet. Not in this life. Not in any life. I was living in a mid-sized city, working late nights at a job downtown. My apartment was a few blocks away, but the streets were sketchy after dark, so I always parked in the same multi-level garage near my building. It wasn't ideal, it was dimly lit, mostly empty at night, and the elevators always seemed to smell like mildew. But it was better than walking alone on the street. One night, I stayed at work later than usual. By the time I left, it was well past 1 a.m. The streets were eerily quiet, and I felt the usual unease as I made my way to the garage. I pulled my coat tighter around me, trying to shake off the chill in the air and the feeling of being watched. When I entered the garage, I noticed it was emptier than usual. My car was on the 3rd level, so I took the stairs up, not wanting to risk the sketchy elevator. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. They weren't hurried, but they weren't casual either, measured, deliberate steps echoing in the empty space. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man a few feet behind me. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. I couldn't make out his face, but something about him set off alarm bells in my head. I quickened my pace, and so did he. My heart started racing. I reached my car, fumbling with my keys, when I heard him speak. "Hey, miss, you dropped something." I turned slightly, keeping my distance, and saw him holding out a piece of paper. I didn't remember dropping anything, but maybe I had. Maybe this was innocent. But his posture was off, too casual, like he was trying to seem non-threatening. Something in my gut told me to keep my distance. "No, I didn't. Thanks," I said quickly, getting into my car and locking the doors. He just stood there, staring at me through the window, the paper still in his hand. Then he said, "Are you sure? Why don't you just come check?" I started my car, my hands trembling. "No, I'm fine," I said, louder this time, hoping to sound braver than I felt. That's when he dropped the paper and lunged at my car, yanking on the door handle. Thank God I'd locked it. He started pounding on the window, shouting something I couldn't make out over the sound of my own heartbeat. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of there as fast as I could, nearly hitting a pillar on my way out. When I got home, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone to call the police. They took my statement and said they'd send someone to check the garage, but I never heard back about it. I started parking somewhere else after that, even if it meant a longer walk home. A few days later, I found myself replaying the incident in my head, trying to convince myself that maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe he'd been a harmless guy who just came off the wrong way. But deep down, I knew better. That feeling in my gut hadn't come out of nowhere. Then, something happened that solidified my fears. I was leaving work again, though this time I made sure it wasn't so late. Just after 9 p.m. the streets were busier, and I felt a little more at ease. Still, as I approached the new parking lot I'd chosen, I noticed a figure leaning against a lamp post across the street. It was him. The same hoodie, the same posture, and the same unsettling stillness. I froze, pretending to fumble with my phone, hoping he hadn't noticed me. But when I glanced up, he was staring right at me. My stomach dropped. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smirk that made my skin crawl, and then he started walking toward me. I didn't even think. I turned and bolted back toward my office, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I reached the lobby and quickly told the security guard what had happened. He walked me to the employee breakfast break room and called the police. When they arrived, I described the man and told them what had happened a few nights prior. They took my report seriously this time and promised to increase patrols in the area. I appreciated it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they wouldn't catch him. He sounded calculated. For weeks, I took extra precautions. I stopped going anywhere alone, carried pepper spray, and even considered changing jobs just to avoid being downtown. I never saw him again, but the paranoia lingered. Every time I entered a parking lot, my heart raced, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. Months later, I got a call from the police. They wanted to let me know that they'd arrested someone who matched the description I gave them. He'd been caught trying to lure a woman into his car with the same "you dropped something" trick. But this time, she hadn't been as lucky. The details of what he did to her so haunt me. I was relieved he was off the streets, but I couldn't help feeling a heavy sense of guilt and dread. What if I'd reported him sooner? What if I'd been more persistent? That poor woman, to anyone reading this, always trust your gut. It's better to be overly cautious than to regret giving someone the benefit of the doubt. After hearing the news, I tried to move on. I told myself he was in custody, that he couldn't hurt me or anyone else anymore. But the fear didn't just disappear. Every sound of the dark seemed louder, every shadow seemed to move, and the sense of being watched never fully went away. A few months passed, and I started to regain a sense of normalcy. I even began parking in the new lot without feeling like I needed to sprint to my car every night. Life was settling down, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Until one night, it was a Friday, and I'd gone out with a few coworkers after work. We stayed at the bar until closing, and by the time I headed to my car, it was around 2 a.m. The streets were eerily quiet, and the buzz of the alcohol was wearing off, leaving me with that familiar unease. I walked briskly, clutching my keys tightly between my fingers, a habit I'd never shaken. When I reached my car, everything seemed fine. I glanced around the lot and didn't see anyone, but as I unlocked my door and got inside, I noticed something on the windshield, a folded piece of paper tucked under the wiper. My stomach twisted. I didn't dare get out to grab it. Instead, I locked the doors, started the car, and drove a few blocks to a well-lit gas station before pulling over to check. My hands were trembling as I stepped out and grabbed the note. In large, scrawled handwriting, it said, "Vespe." My blood ran cold. My vision blurred as panic set in. It couldn't be him. The police said he was in custody. They said he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. But how else could this note be explained? I didn't wait around to analyze it. I jumped back in my car and drove straight to the nearest police station, clutching the paper the entire way. The officers took me seriously, though their reassurances didn't calm me. They told me it was possible someone else had left the note, a sick joke by someone who'd read the news about his arrest. But I knew it was him. The next day, they confirmed my worst fear. The man had been released on a technicality, some mishandled evidence or legal loophole. I didn't care about the details. All I knew was that he was free and he'd found me. That week, I moved out of the city. I quit my job, broke my lease, and left everything behind. I couldn't sleep knowing he was still out there, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. It's been years now, and I still jump at shadows. I've changed my name, my appearance, and my routine more times than I can count. I live in a small town now, far from where it all started. Most days, I feel safe, but every so often, I'll see a car that looks like his, or hear footsteps behind me, and my chest tightens. I used to work the closing shift at a 24-hour grocery store in my small hometown. It wasn't a particularly exciting job, but I didn't mind the quiet hours. Most nights, the store was nearly empty, save for a few late-night shoppers grabbing last-minute items. I liked the solitude until the night I didn't. It was a Thursday, and the store had been dead all evening. By 11:30 p.m., there was just me, my coworker Maria, and the overnight stock guy, Kevin. Maria was in the back counting tills, and Kevin was somewhere in the warehouse prepping pallets. I was alone at the register, scrolling on my phone when the automatic doors whooshed open. A woman walked in, her head down, wearing a hoodie pulled up so I couldn't see her face. That wasn't unusual. Plenty of people wanted to stay anonymous during late-night shopping trips. What was strange was her pacing. She didn't grab a cart or a basket, and she wasn't looking at anything on the shelves. Instead, she just wandered up and down the aisles, her hands in her pockets, occasionally glancing over at me. I tried not to let it bother me. People are weird sometimes, right? Maybe she was just killing time or waiting for someone. But something about the way she moved felt off. Her steps were too deliberate, like she was walking a route she'd rehearsed. After about 15 minutes of this, Maria came out from the back with the cash drops. She immediately noticed my discomfort. "You okay?" she whispered, glancing toward the woman in the produce section. "I don't know," I said, keeping my voice low. "She's just been wandering around. She hasn't bought anything." Maria frowned but shrugged. "Probably nothing. Just keep an eye on her." The woman must have overheard us, because she abruptly left the produce section and started heading toward the exit. I felt a wave of relief as the doors opened and closed behind her, but the relief didn't last. Less than 5 minutes later, the automatic doors opened again. This time, a man walked in. He was tall and thin, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't grab a cart either. Instead, he walked straight past me toward the back of the store where Maria had gone to finish her tasks. Something about him set me on edge. Maybe it was the way he didn't even glance at the shelves or how he walked with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. My stomach twisted when I realized he wasn't just heading to the back, he was following the same path the woman had paced earlier. I grabbed the phone and paged Kevin over the intercom, trying to sound casual. "Kevin, can you come to the front, please?" No response. I paged again. Still nothing. The store was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears and makes your heart race. I decided I wasn't waiting around for something bad to happen. I walked quickly to the back, calling out for Maria as I went. When I found her in the office, I blurted, "There's a guy out here. I think he's following the same route as that woman earlier. Something's wrong." Maria's face paled, but she stayed calm. "Let's check the cameras." We pulled up the live feed, and there they were, the man and the woman together now. They were standing in one of the darker aisles, heads close together, clearly whispering. And then, as if they sensed they were being watched, both of them turned and looked directly into the camera. I swear they knew. Maria didn't hesitate. She grabbed the phone and called the police, describing the situation as calmly as she could. Meanwhile, I kept my eyes on the cameras. The pair started moving again, this time heading straight for the back door near the warehouse. "Kevin's back there," I said, panic rising. We ran to the warehouse just as the pair slipped out through the emergency exit. Kevin was fine, thankfully, though he looked confused and a little freaked out when we told him what happened. The police arrived quickly and searched the area but didn't find anyone. They took our statements and reviewed the camera footage, promising to follow up. But they never caught the pair, and as far as I know, they never even figured out what the two were planning. I quit that job not long after. After quitting that job, I thought I'd feel a sense of relief. Instead, I found myself more paranoid than ever. Every time I walked into a store or down a quiet street, I'd catch myself scanning my surroundings, watching for anyone who seemed out of place. I told myself it was just lingering nerves, but deep down, I knew better. A couple of weeks after I left, Maria called me. "You're not gonna believe this," she said, her voice shaky. "I got a call from the police today. They think they know who those people were." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Did they find them?" "Not exactly," she replied, "but they've been investigating a string of burglaries in the area. It turns out that grocery stores, especially ones open late, are being targeted as part of some bigger operation. The suspects scope out the layout, figure out security blind spots, and then hit the place after hours. They think that's what those two were doing." My mind raced. But why were they so focused on us? Why didn't they just come back later to rob the place? Maria hesitated. "That's the thing. They don't think the store was the main target. Apparently, there's been a pattern of employees being followed home after late shifts, stalked, threatened, and even attacked. They think the woman was marking you, and the man was supposed to, I don't know, follow through to something." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The idea that I might have been the real target, that they might have been planning to follow me home, made my skin crawl. My little one-bedroom apartment had always felt like a safe haven. Now, the thought of it made me feel vulnerable and exposed. "Are they watching the store now?" I asked. "Yeah," Maria said. "They've increased patrols in the area and told us to be extra cautious. But they still haven't found them." I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside made my heart pound. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, but it didn't help. I felt like they could be anywhere, waiting, watching. A few days later, I noticed something strange. I was walking home from my new job at a coffee shop, and I had this nagging feeling that someone was behind me. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but when I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of someone, a figure in a hoodie, ducking into an alleyway. My chest tightened. I didn't want to seem crazy, so I kept walking, but my pace quickened, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. By the time I got to my apartment building, I was practically running. I fumbled with my keys, got inside, and bolted the door behind me. I checked the peephole, but didn't see anyone. The next morning, I found a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It was blank, except for a single word scrawled in messy handwriting. Soon, that was it. I packed up my things that day and moved in with my sister in a different town. I didn't care about breaking my lease or explaining myself to my landlord. My safety was worth more than anything else. I've never seen or heard from those people again, but the experience changed me forever. I don't go anywhere without letting someone know where I'll be, and I always carry pepper spray in my bag. Moving in with my sister gave me some sense of security, but the fear lingered. For a while, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even in a new town miles away. Every time I went out, I scanned the streets, parked in well-lit areas, and avoided walking alone at night. My sister tried to reassure me, telling me it was just my anxiety playing tricks on me. I wanted to believe her. About 3 months after I moved in, something happened that shattered any illusion of safety I had managed to build. My sister and I were out running errands one evening, and we stopped at a grocery store. It was a different chain from the one where I used to work, but it still gave me an odd sense of deja vu. I kept close to her, clutching my bag tightly. As we wandered through the aisles, I spotted a man at the other end of the store. He was tall and thin, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He was looking at a display of canned goods, but something about his posture caught my attention. My heart started racing. No, I muttered under my breath. It can't be. What's wrong? My sister asked, noticing the panic on my face. I didn't want to alarm her, so I shook my head. Nothing. I just thought I saw someone I knew. She frowned but let it go. Still, I couldn't stop glancing over at him. He moved with the same deliberate steps I'd seen before, methodical and calm. My stomach churned as he turned and walked toward another aisle, disappearing from view. I tried to tell myself it wasn't him. It was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But when we left the store, I saw him again. He was sitting in a car parked a few spaces away, his head turned toward us. I grabbed my sister's arm and hurried her to our car, locking the doors the moment we got inside. What is going on? She demanded, her voice sharp with concern. I'll explain later, I said, my voice trembling. Just drive. No, she didn't argue. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the side mirror and saw the man's car pull out too. He was following us. Don't go home, I said quickly. Drive somewhere busy. A gas station, a restaurant, anywhere with people. Panic flashed across her face, but she nodded and turned toward a nearby diner. The man's car followed us all the way there, only pulling off when we turned into the well-lit parking lot. I watched him drive past, my heart pounding. Inside the diner, I finally told my sister everything about the strange customers, the message on my car, and the lingering fear I couldn't shake. She didn't call me paranoid or brush it off. Instead, she hugged me tightly and said, we're going to figure this out. The next day, we filed a police report. They took down the details but couldn't do much without concrete evidence. I decided to install cameras around our house and started parking in the garage instead of on the street. I even changed my phone number just in case. Weeks passed and I didn't see the man again. The police never found him and I never got another threatening message. But the experience left me scarred. I still don't know if it was the same man from that night at the grocery store or just someone new who decided to target me. Either way, I wasn't going to take any chances. To the man who followed me and made me feel like prey, you didn't win. I'm still here and I've learned how to protect myself. I was renting a cozy little house on the edge of a nature reserve. It was the kind of place where you knew your neighbors, and we all left our doors unlocked during the day. I never felt unsafe there until this incident. One night, I stayed up late binge watching a new show. It was past midnight, and I was just starting to doze off on the couch when I heard it, a soft tapping on my back door. Not a knock, mind you. It was more like someone lightly drumming their fingertips against the glass. I froze. My back door was one of those older style doors with a big glass window in the middle. The curtains were drawn, so I couldn't see who or what was on the other side. I tried to convince myself it was just a branch or maybe an animal, but then it happened again, more insistent this time. I got up, heart racing, and tiptoed to the door. I didn't open it. Instead, I moved the curtain aside just a fraction and peeked out. There was nothing there. The yard was empty, bathed in the cold glow of the porch light. I let out a shaky breath and decided I was just being paranoid. I double-checked the lock on the door and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed something strange. On the outside of the glass, there were smudges. 5 faint, greasy streaks, like someone had pressed their hand against it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe one of the neighbor kids had come by and got spooked when they realized how late it was. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that someone had been watching me. A week passed without incident. Then, one evening, I came home to find something new. On the back door, someone had painted a large, red X. It wasn't spray paint. It looked like it had been painted with a brush. The lines were clean, deliberate. I called the police, but they didn't find much to go on. No footprints, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. That night, I barely slept. I stayed on the couch with all the lights on and a baseball bat by my side. At some point in the early morning, I must have drifted off because I woke to a sound I'll never forget, my front door creaking open. I shot up, gripping the bat, and shouted, "Who's there?" Silence. I crept to the door, bat raised, and found it wide open. The lock was intact, no signs of damage. It was as if someone had unlocked it with a key. I moved out the next day. The house sat empty for months after that. When I finally mustered the courage to ask my former landlord if they'd found another tenant, They told me something that sent chills down my spine. They'd recently done some renovations and discovered a hidden crawl space under the floorboards in the master bedroom. Inside, they found a pile of cigarette butts, empty food wrappers, and a small mattress. Someone had been living there. I tried to forget about that house and what had happened, but the idea that someone had been living under my floorboards, silently coexisting with me, haunted me. I thought about all the nights I'd heard strange creaks and groans, dismissing them as the house settling, all the times I felt like I was being watched but couldn't find a reason why. It made my skin crawl. A couple of months later, I was living in a new place in a different town, trying to move on. But one night, I got a call from an unknown number. I normally wouldn't have answered, but something compelled me to. "Hello," I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then a man's voice, low and scratchy, said, "Why'd you leave?" My stomach dropped. I hung up immediately and blocked the number. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I wanted to believe it was just a prank, but deep down, I knew better. I reported it to the police, but they told me there wasn't much they could do. Without evidence or further contact, it was just an anonymous phone call. I tried to convince myself it was over, but it wasn't. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find a package on my doorstep. It didn't have a return address. Stupidly, I brought it inside, thinking it might be from a friend or delivery mix-up. Inside the box was a single item, the same red paper she used to mark my door at the old house. I immediately called the police, but once again, they couldn't do much. There was no fingerprint evidence, no surveillance footage from my new apartment complex. I started to feel like I was going crazy. After that, the little things started happening again. I'd hear fate tapping at my windows late at night. My porch light would flicker even though the bulb was new. Once, I found my front door unlocked when I was sure I'd locked it before bed. The final straw came one night when I was in bed, scrolling on my phone. My bedroom window faced the street, and I always kept the blinds drawn for privacy. But that night, for some reason, I glanced up and saw the silhouette of a person standing just outside. They didn't move. They just stood there, backlit by the street lamp, staring directly at my window. I froze, too scared to even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, I grabbed my phone and called 911. By the time the police arrived, the figure was gone. The officers were kind but skeptical. They said it was probably just a neighbor or someone passing by. But I knew better. I packed up and left town the next morning. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my friends. I moved to a new city under a new lease, changed my phone number, and started locking every door and window obsessively. It's been 2 years now, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. I want to believe I've escaped whoever or whatever it was that had fixated on me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that soft tapping sound in my dreams. Even after 2 years of relative silence, the paranoia never completely left me. I've tried to move on, even started therapy to deal with the lingering anxiety, but I still feel the weight of that time in my life. Every noise of the night sets me on edge. Every unfamiliar face in a crowd makes my stomach churn. I thought I'd finally found peace in my new home. It's a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a well-secured building. My neighbors are friendly but keep to themselves, and I feel safe knowing I'm up high, with a solid front door and a locked entry to the building. But last week, something happened that has me questioning everything. I came home late from work. It was one of those long days where you're so tired you barely remember getting into bed. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I noticed something odd, a small red smudge on the wall next to my door. It was faint, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, but it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just paint from someone moving furniture or a maintenance worker who'd brushed up against the wall. I didn't want to overthink it. I went inside, locked the door, and told myself to forget about it. The next morning, I opened my door to head to work and saw something that stopped me cold. On my door frame, near the handle, was another mark, a small red X, this time drawn clearly with what looked like lipstick. I felt sick. I called the building manager, who assured me they'd check the security footage and look into it. I stayed at a friend's place that night, too scared to sleep in my apartment. The next day, the manager called me back. There's nothing on the footage, he said, sounding confused. No one came up to your door last night. Are you sure the mark wasn't already there? I hung up, shaking. I knew it wasn't there before. I knew someone had been outside my door. That evening, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It was a single piece of paper with just 3 words written on it. You can't hide. I packed a bag and left immediately. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I drove aimlessly for hours, checking into a random motel far from my apartment. The police are involved now, but they found no evidence, no suspects, nothing. I've told them everything, but without proof, they can't do much. I feel like I'm spiraling. How did they find me? How are they getting so close without anyone noticing? I've started to feel like I'm being watched everywhere I go. At the grocery store, in my car, even when I'm inside my motel room. I've started covering the windows, sleeping with the lights on, and keeping a weapon within arm's reach. Last night, I woke up to the sound of fate tapping. This time, it wasn't at a door or window. It was coming from the mirror in the motel bathroom. I didn't check. I didn't want to know. I just grabbed my things and left. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know where to go. To the person or thing that keeps finding me, please, I beg you, let's never meet again. It all started last winter when I moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood. I had just gotten out of a messy breakup and needed a place to start fresh. The rent for the small, 2-bedroom house was suspiciously low, but the landlord, an older woman named Mrs. Davenport, seemed eager to have someone move in. She mentioned it had been vacant for a while, so I thought I was just lucky. The house itself was cozy, if a bit outdated. The hardwood floors creaked with every step, and the walls seemed to amplify even the smallest noise. Still, it was mine, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had a space to call home. The first night passed uneventfully, save for a strange, almost rhythmic creaking sound coming from the ceiling. I chalked it up to the old wooden beams settling in the cold. The next day, I unpacked and began to settle into a routine. A few nights later, I was reading in bed when I heard it again, the creaking, but this time it was accompanied by what sounded like faint, deliberate footsteps. My heart raced. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and shone it around the room, half expecting to see a raccoon or some other critter that had somehow gotten in. But there was nothing. The sounds continued, always at night and always in the same pattern: creak, step, pause. It got to the point where I started dreading bedtime, knowing that as soon as the house grew quiet, the noises would begin. One night, I decided I'd had enough. Armed with a baseball bat and my phone, I made my way into the attic. The narrow staircase groaned under my weight as I climbed, each step feeling like it stretched into eternity. The attic door was heavier than I expected, and when I pushed it open, a musty smell hit me. I shone my flashlight around, illuminating dusty boxes and cobwebs. There was no sign of anything living, no animals, no intruders. But as I was about to head back down, something caught my eye: a small, child-sized chair sitting in the corner of the attic. It looked out of place, too clean compared to everything else up there. On the floor next to it was a piece of paper, folded neatly. I hesitated before picking it up. My hand shook as I unfolded it, revealing a crudely drawn picture of a figure standing in front of a house. Scrawled underneath in shaky handwriting were the words, "I live here too." I bolted out of the attic, locking the door behind me. I barely slept that night. The note clutched in my hand as I sat on the couch, every creak of the house sending chills down my spine. The next morning, I called Mrs. Davenport to demand answers. At first, she was evasive, but when I mentioned the drawing, she sighed heavily. "I didn't want to scare you," she said, her voice trembling, "but the previous tenants left in a hurry. They said they heard things, saw things. I thought it was just their imaginations." That was all I needed to hear. I packed my things and left that same day, forfeiting my deposit. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the window of the house. A few weeks after I moved out, I tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. I found a new apartment in a bustling part of town where the constant noise of the city was a comfort compared to the eerie silence of that old house. Life started to feel normal again, but then things got strange. One morning, I received a package in the mail with no return address. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, and my name was scrawled on the front in handwriting that seemed vaguely familiar. My stomach sank as I opened it. Inside was the same piece of paper I'd found in the attic, the crude drawing of the house and the figure with the words "I live here too." But now there was something new added to the picture, a second figure standing next to the first. It was smaller, and it had long lines extending from its head, almost like hair. My breath caught as I realized it resembled me. I called the police immediately. The officer who came to my apartment tried to reassure me, but I could tell he didn't take it seriously. He suggested it might have been a prank by the landlord or even the previous tenants. I wasn't convinced. A week later, I started receiving calls from an unknown number. At first, I didn't answer, but the persistence was unnerving. Finally, I picked up one night, hoping to tell whoever it was to leave me alone. "Hello," I said, my voice shaking. There was silence on the other end, but I could hear faint breathing. Then a soft, childlike voice whispered, "I miss you." I froze, unable to speak, before the line went dead. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I immediately blocked the number, but the calls continued from different ones. I stopped answering altogether, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, as I was coming home from work, I felt it again, the sensation of eyes on me. I turned around quickly, scanning the street, but there was nothing unusual, just people going about their day. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I hurried inside and locked the door. That night, I woke up to a sound that sent chills down my spine, the creak of floorboards, followed by faint footsteps. But I wasn't in that house anymore. I was on the 3rd floor of a secure apartment building. There was no attic here, no old wooden beams. I stayed frozen in bed, straining to hear more. The sound sound moved closer and closer still until it was right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, gripping my phone and preparing to call the police when the footsteps stopped. I sat there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, until the morning light streamed through my window. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, there was nothing there, but on the floor, right outside my room, was another piece of paper. This one was blank except for 3 words scrawled in the middle: "Found you again." I didn't sleep for days after that. I moved out of the apartment a week later, breaking my lease and going off the grid. I changed my number, stayed with friends, and even considered moving to another state. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever or whoever it was would follow me no matter where I went. I haven't had any more incidents since then, but every time I hear the creak of floorboards or feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, I can't help but wonder, did I really leave it behind? It's been a year since I went off the grid, but the fear hasn't left me. I've tried everything to keep my life quiet and untraceable. No social media, no forwarding address, a burner phone, anything to keep whatever was haunting me from finding me again. For a while, it seemed like I'd finally escaped. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I was safe. But that was before last week. It started small. I'd moved to a rural area, renting a small cabin in the woods. No neighbors for miles, no one to bother me, and, I thought, no way for anyone to find me. But one evening, as I was sitting by the fireplace reading, I heard a sound outside, a light tapping against the window. My heart leaped into my throat. I told myself it was just the wind or a branch brushing against the glass. When I finally worked up the courage to check, I saw nothing. No wind, no branches nearby, just the cold, still night. The next morning, I found footprints in the snow outside the cabin. They weren't boot prints, though they were small, like a child's. They led from the forest edge right up to my window, then disappeared back into the trees. I told myself it must have been a prank, maybe some local kids messing around, but I couldn't shake the gnawing unease. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of tapping again. This time, it wasn't at the window, it was on the cabin door. It was soft at first, like a gentle knock, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed the kitchen knife I kept by my bed and crept toward the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. The tapping stopped. I stood there, knife in hand, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I mustered the courage to peek through the peephole. My stomach dropped. On the porch was a small, child-sized chair, the same chair from the attic of that house. Sitting on it was a piece of paper. I didn't want to open the door, but I couldn't just leave it there, mocking me. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and grabbed the paper, slamming the door shut behind me. This one was different. The drawing showed the cabin now, surrounded by trees. The figure was there too, but this time it wasn't alone. Next to it stood the second figure, the one that looked like me, but now a third figure had been added. It was larger than the others, looming over them with jagged lines that made it look like it was. Smiling underneath the drawing were the words, "We're all together now." I didn't sleep that night. I kept every light in the cabin on and stayed with my back against the wall, clutching the knife until the sun rose. When morning finally came, I packed what little I had and left. I didn't care where I was going, just as long as it was far away. Now, I'm writing this from a motel in the middle of nowhere, the knife still within arm's reach. I don't know what to do anymore. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, it keeps finding me. And I can't help but wonder who or what is the third figure. Is it already with me, waiting for the right moment? Or is it something I haven't met yet? A few years ago, I went on a solo camping trip to a state forest about an hour outside my town. I had just gone through a tough breakup and needed some time alone to clear my head. I wasn't an experienced camper, but I had the basics: tent, sleeping bag, some food, and a small propane stove. I arrived mid-afternoon, found a marked trail, and hiked about 3 miles in before deciding to set up camp near a small, serene lake. There were no other cars in the parking lot when I started my hike, and I didn't see a single soul on the trail. It felt like I had the entire forest to myself. As the sun set, I cooked some dinner and watched the sky turn shades of orange and purple. It was one of those moments where everything feels perfectly peaceful. I zipped myself into my tent a little after dark, listening to the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. I must have fallen asleep quickly because the next thing I remember was waking up to the sound of footsteps. Not animal footsteps, these were heavy, deliberate, human steps. My heart started pounding as I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe someone else decided to camp nearby, but I hadn't seen or heard anyone all day. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. Whomever it was, they just stood there. The only thing between us was a thin layer of nylon. I couldn't see their shadow because the moonlight didn't reach through the trees where I had set up camp. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a low, raspy voice say, "You're in my spot." I didn't reply. My mind was racing, trying to decide what to do. Then the voice spoke again, louder this time. "You shouldn't have come here." The sound of fabric tearing broke the silence as something sharp sliced into the side of my tent. I screamed and scrambled out through the opposite side, running into the woods without my flashlight or shoes. I didn't care which direction I was going, I just needed to get away. As I ran, I heard branches snapping behind me. They were following me. My lungs burned, my feet were being cut up by rocks and twigs, but I didn't dare stop. Eventually, I tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping my knees and hands. I crouched behind a large fallen tree, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Minutes passed, then an hour. I didn't hear anything except my own ragged breathing. When the first hints of dawn appeared, I cautiously made my way back to my campsite. My tent was slashed to ribbons, and my gear was scattered everywhere. But what made my stomach drop was what I found near the remains of my tent: a rusted hunting knife stabbed into the ground, and a crudely carved wooden figurine of a person lying on their side. I didn't take anything with me. I ran back to the trailhead, jumped into my car, and didn't stop driving until I was home. I reported the incident to the park rangers, but they didn't find anything except my destroyed tent and some footprints that led off into the forest. For weeks after the incident, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that voice, slow, raspy, and unrelenting, "You shouldn't have come here." Every sound of the night made me jump, and I found myself obsessively checking the locks on my doors and windows. The park rangers had been polite but dismissive when I filed my report. They chalked it up to a homeless individual or an overzealous survivalist living off the grid. Still, their lack of concern didn't sit well with me. The figurine, the knife, the way they followed me through the woods, none of it felt random. It felt deliberate. A month after the camping trip, I started noticing small things that felt off. My backyard gate, which I always locked, would be open in the mornings. My dog, a mutt named Daisy, started acting strangely, growling at empty corners of the house and barking incessantly at night. I'd occasionally hear faint knocks at the front door or on the windows late at night, but whenever I checked, no one was there. The worst incident happened about 6 weeks after the camping trip. I came home from work late one evening and found my front door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it before leaving. My heart sank as I pushed the door open, half expecting someone to jump out at me. The house was quiet, too quiet. Daisy, who usually greeted me at the door with her tail wagging, was nowhere to be seen. I called her name, my voice trembling. A faint whine came from the kitchen. When I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. Daisy was there, crouched under the table, trembling. On the kitchen counter was something that made my blood run cold. Another wooden figurine, identical to the one I had found at the campsite. It was lying on its side, just like the first one, but this time, the figure had a small red smear on its chest. I grabbed Daisy and ran out of the house, not bothering to lock the door behind me. I drove to a friend's place and called the police. They searched the house and didn't find anything, no signs of forced entry, no intruder. The figurine, they said, was probably a prank or something I had left there myself. They didn't take me seriously. That was the last straw. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I broke my lease and moved in with my sister for a few months while I figured things out. During that time, the strange occurrences stopped. Daisy seemed to relax, and I finally began to feel a semblance of safety again. But I still think about that night in the woods and everything that followed. Was it all just a coincidence? Some twisted prankster trying to scare me? Or was it something darker, something I'll never fully understand? After a few months of staying with my sister, I finally saved up enough money to move into a new apartment across town. It was smaller, on the second floor of a building with plenty of neighbors close by. I chose it specifically because it felt secure, multiple locks on the doors, windows that didn't face the street, and a fire escape that led to a locked alley. For a while, life started to feel normal again. I got back into my routines and even started seeing a therapist to work through the lingering anxiety and nightmares. Daisy adjusted well to the new place, and her old habits of growling at shadows and barking at night disappeared completely. But then, one evening, it happened again. I came home late after grabbing dinner with some coworkers. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I noticed something strange. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Usually, Daisy would come running to greet me, but she didn't. I called her name, and after a few moments, I heard her whimpering from the bedroom. When I walked in, I found her hiding under the bed, trembling, just like she had that night in the kitchen. My stomach dropped as I turned on the light and saw it, another wooden figurine, placed neatly in the center of my bed. This one was different, though. It was larger, more detailed. The figure was crouched, with its hands covering its face, as if it were weeping. A fresh, red smear was painted across its back. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room room. My hand shook as I grabbed Daisy and backed out of the apartment. I called the police from the hallway, trying to stay calm as I explained what had happened. The officers who responded were more thorough this time, and they searched the apartment from top to bottom, checking every window, door, and even the fire escape. There was no sign of forced entry, and all the locks were intact. Once again, they seemed skeptical, suggesting that someone might have a spare key or that I'd somehow brought the figurine myself. I knew better. This wasn't a prank, and it wasn't random. Whoever had left that figurine had been inside my home. After the police left, I called my sister and spent the night at her place again. I didn't know what else to do. I felt like I was being hunted, like no matter where I went, this person or thing would find me. The next morning, I returned to the apartment to pack some essentials. I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. As I was grabbing a suitcase from the closet, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Scratch marks on the inside of the closet door. They were deep, erratic, as if someone had been clawing at it from the inside. I moved out that same day and never went back. It's been a year since that last incident. I moved to a different state, changed my phone number, and made sure my new address wasn't listed anywhere publicly. I've done everything I can to disappear, to make sure that whatever was following me can't find me again. So far, it's worked, but I still double check every lock before bed, and I keep a bat next to my bed just in case. Every so often, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear footsteps or the faint sound of that raspy voice. I had found a cute little rental cottage on the edge of a vast field. It was idyllic, quiet, surrounded by nature, and with no neighbors in sight except for an old, abandoned house across the field. The house was a classic haunted house type, peeling paint, broken windows, and a saggy roof. I'd heard from my landlord that it had been empty for decades after the last owner passed away. Local kids occasionally dared each other to sneak inside, but mostly people avoided it. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Life got busy, and my evenings were spent unwinding on the porch with a cup of tea, enjoying the peaceful view. It wasn't until about 3 weeks in that I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was just a reflection of the moonlight on the broken windows, but then I realized it was coming from inside the house. It flickered faintly, like a candle or a weak flashlight. I figured it must be kids messing around, so I brushed it off. The light disappeared after a few minutes. A few nights later, the light was back. This time, it was brighter and stayed on longer. I felt uneasy but told myself it was just my imagination running wild. I'd even joked to myself that maybe the ghost of the old owner was keeping me company. Then came the night I heard the music. I was in bed, reading, when a faint tune reached my ears. It was high-pitched and eerie, like an old music box. At first, I thought it was coming from my neighbor's property on the far side of the field, but when I stepped outside to listen, it was unmistakably coming from the abandoned house. The light was on again. I stood frozen on the porch, staring across the field. The music stopped abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in its place. Then, just as I was about to go back inside, I saw movement in the window, a shadow passing by. That was the first time I felt real fear. Whoever was in there wasn't just some kid playing a prank. The movements were deliberate, slow, and deliberate, as if they knew I was watching. I locked all my doors and windows and stayed up the rest of the night, jumping at every creak and rustle. By morning, the house looked as empty as ever, the light gone. I told a coworker about it the next day, expecting them to laugh it off, but their face turned serious. "You should call the sheriff," they said. "There's been talk about squatters in the area, people who don't want to be found." I made the call, and the sheriff agreed to check it out. That evening, I saw his cruiser parked by the house as I drove home. I felt a little better knowing someone was taking it seriously. The sheriff called me later that night. "We didn't find anyone," he said, "but there were signs someone's been staying there. Candles, old blankets, some cans of food. We'll keep an eye on it." I hoped that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my window. I didn't even think. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the operator that someone was outside. While I waited for the police, I stayed as quiet as possible, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The footsteps circled my house slowly, methodically. Whoever it was never tried to get in, they just lingered. When the sirens finally came, the footsteps stopped. By the time the police arrived, there was no sign of anyone. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed up my things and moved into a motel until I could find a new place. I didn't even go back for the rest of my stuff. I told the landlord he could keep it. A week after moving into the motel, I was starting to feel like I could breathe again. I'd found a temporary apartment in the city and was focused on putting the experience behind me. Still, there were nights when I'd wake up, heart racing, convinced I'd hear that eerie music or those slow, deliberate footsteps. Then, I got got a call from my former landlord. Hey, he started, his voice hesitant. You left some stuff behind, and I was going through the cottage to clear it out. Oh, I think you should know. There was something strange. My stomach dropped. Strange how. In the crawl space under the porch, I was checking for critters before I put the place back up for rent, and I found, well, there were piles of cigarette butts, empty cans, and, oh, a blanket. Someone had been living under there. I could hardly breathe. My mind raced back to the footsteps circling my house. They hadn't been looking for a way in. They'd already been inside my space. I called the sheriff. He continued quickly. They came out and found more stuff. A notebook, some tools, a weird collection of, I don't even know how to describe it, like little trinkets, and some drawings. What kind of drawings? I asked, my voice trembling. There was a long pause. They looked like your house. And you, from different angles, like someone had been watching you. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I thanked him and hung up, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying what he said. Someone had been under my porch, watching me, following me. All those nights I thought I was alone in that quiet little cottage. I wasn't. The sheriff called me the next day to confirm they'd opened an investigation, but there wasn't much they could do. Whoever it was had disappeared. They didn't leave anything that could point to an identity, and there hadn't been any more signs of them at the old house. I tried to move on, I really did. But then, a couple of months later, I found something in my mailbox at the new apartment. There was no return address, no postage stamp, just a plain white envelope with my name scrawled across the front in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single photo. It was a picture of me sitting on the porch of the cottage, drinking tea. The angle was high, like it had been taken from the attic of the abandoned house. I called the police immediately, but of course, there was nothing they could do. No fingerprints, no leads, just the haunting reminder that someone, somewhere, had been watching me and still was. It's been a year now. I've moved 3 times since then, always choosing apartments with high security and lots of neighbors. I've changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and done everything I could to erase my digital footprint. But every so often, I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone is watching me. I check the windows, the locks, the security cameras, and I never ever sit near open windows or venture out alone at night. Months passed without incident, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. I stayed vigilant, of course, always locking my doors, staying aware of my surroundings, but life began to feel normal again. Until last week. It was a quiet evening, and I was home alone, as usual. My new apartment had all the features I thought would keep me safe. Keycard entry, cameras in the hallways, and neighbors on either side. I had convinced myself this was the kind of place where nothing could happen. I was watching TV when I heard a soft thump outside my door. My stomach sank immediately. It was too late for deliveries, and I wasn't expecting anyone. For a few moments, I froze, listening intently. When nothing else happened, I convinced myself it must have been a neighbor or a package being dropped off. Still, I got up to check. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing but the empty hallway. Reluctantly, I opened the door. Lying on the floor in front of my apartment was a small, wrapped package. It was brown paper tied with twine, unmarked. No address, no label, no explanation. My hand shook as I picked it up and closed the door behind me. I placed the package on the kitchen counter and stared at it for what felt like hours, debating whether to open it. Part of me wanted to throw it away immediately, but I needed to know what was inside. Finally, I grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut the twine. I peeled back the paper to reveal a small wooden box, crudely carved and slightly splintered. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me sitting in my living room, taken through the window. I felt the blood drain from my face. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, with no balcony and no way to access the window from outside. Whoever took that photo had to have been inside my building, or worse, inside my apartment. I called the police immediately, choking out the details as best as I could. They arrived quickly, searched my apartment and the surrounding area, but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone being there. The officers tried to reassure me, but I could tell from their faces they were as unsettled as I was. They took the box and the photo as evidence, but without any fingerprints or identifiable marks, they admitted there wasn't much they could do. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of my living room with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife, listening for the slightest sound. The next day, I packed my things and left the apartment. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not the landlord, not my friends, not even my family. I've been staying in motels, paying in cash, moving every few days. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I know they're still out there, and I know they'll find me again. To whoever you are, I'm not the same scared girl you watched through the window. If we meet again, it won't end the way you expect. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.